This is James Marshall Hendrix. We all know him as Jimi. And 55 years after his passing, he's still considered the greatest guitar player ever. In the past couple of years, I've heard things about Jimi that don't match up to what I learned about him. So I'll tell you the information that I'm having trouble with, and before I do that, I'll tell you how I came across learning anything about him at all. Back when I was a college radio DJ, I was a big Jimi Hendrix fan. Jimi had passed away a long time before I became a fan, so I was learning about his music way after the fact. I decided I wanted to start playing his music on air, and along with that, I wanted to tell the listeners something about him. I told one of the fellow DJs what I planned to do, and he liked the idea. He liked it so much that he planned on doing the same thing for his own broadcast. He was a jazz DJ, so he hadn't planned to talk about Jimi Hendrix. He had planned to talk about Miles Davis. He told me he had met Miles years ago to do an interview with him in his dressing room. Though his interview with Miles didn't go so well, I thought it was still notable that he could bring the personal experience of meeting him to his listeners. His experience made me rethink how I would go about researching Jimi for my own broadcast. I had never met Jimi, and since he had passed away years ago, I had no way of bringing a personal experience to my listeners. I thought to make up for my lack of personal experience to really dig into Jimi's past and learn everything that I could. So I went out and bought all of Jimi's CDs, videos, recorded concerts, and he had been in a couple of movies. I ordered those too. On the weekends, I went to a few libraries where I read their books, their newspaper articles, and I went into their sound rooms. The library's sound rooms is where I got lots of information about Jimi's personal life. The sound rooms not only had Jimi's interviews, it also had Jimi's friends, girlfriends, associates, and fellow musicians. They all talked about Jimi's past. One of my absolute favorites out of anyone who talked about Jimi was his ex-girlfriend, Lithophane Pridgeton. Lithophane is the kind of person who serves up a kind of blazing honesty and doesn't care how it sounds or how anybody feels about what she says. Her style is to deliver the truth and tell it like it is. No regard to feelings, embarrassment, or indifference. She just serves you the facts. About 3 months into studying up on Jimi, I thought I was ready to start playing his music and talking about him as though I actually knew him. There was a problem. I was in the military at the time, and some things had changed up regarding my duties. My career took priority over school, and I had to give up radio broadcasting for a while. It was frustrating that I had done all of this for nothing because I hadn't got a chance to play one Jimi Hendrix song or even talk about him at all. In the months to come, I must have drove my friends and family members crazy with all of the facts that I told them about Hendrix. Before long, I wound up changing duty locations in the military. So I never got a chance to talk about Jimi on air, and I never got a chance to play any of his songs over the radio. Fast forward to last year in 2024, when I start hearing a few things that don't match up to anything that I've ever researched about Jimi. So I'm going to take a moment now to respond to those things. Here are the 3 things that I'm going to respond to. 1 is that Jimi never experienced racism as a performer. Number 2, Jimi had career plans that either angered or worried music executives. Number 3, Jimi was eliminated in a bathtub. Okay, so let's get to it. Let's start with number 1. Jimi never experienced racism as a performer. That statement is absolutely false. Jimi was a black American born in Seattle, Washington in 1942. Segregation was the law of the land in the United States, and Jimi experienced racism and discrimination same as all other black Americans during that time period. With all of his skill and talent, he was still a little-known musician playing small clubs in New York. Jimi was a rock musician who pioneered the sound of today's rock guitar back in the 60s. Despite his uniqueness and talent as a performer, he could not get a record deal or anything significant in America. Racism was holding Jimi back in the United States, which is why he packed up and left for England with his manager, Chas Chandler. Even though Jimi achieved the level of fame within a year of arriving in England, he still experienced racism there too. Housing managers refused to rent Jimi an apartment close to where he performed, so Jimi had to get a white friend to put the apartment in their name. Racism also played a role in Jimi's final hours of life, and I'll get to that a little later. So any statement about Jimi never experiencing racism is false. Okay, so let's get to number 2. Jimi had career plans that either angered or worried music executives. I thought it was interesting when I saw a few people bring this up because they made it sound like that Jimi was on the verge of making a few career moves that would involve royalties or money and that would anger or worry music executives and get him targeted for elimination. And in addition to that, I heard some people say that Jimi was involved in activism and financing militant black groups and things like that. Supposedly what they were saying was that Jimi's activism or efforts towards fairness and equality for black people in the United States may have also got him targeted. Logically speaking, Jimi may have helped finance civil rights groups to help get equality for black people in America. What I'll say is that I wasn't able to find anything about Jimi's activism in my research. Though it wasn't in my research, common sense tells me that, yeah, he would help finance freedom and equality and fairness for black people. I would. If it had been me back in that time and I had the resources, yeah, I would help finance something like that. What I'm saying is that I didn't find anything that would suggest that he was involved at all. Definitely not at a level that would get him targeted for anything negative. And back to his career plans. I found absolutely nothing that would suggest that Jimi was on the verge of changing anything administratively that would affect his music career. Matter of fact, Jimi's intellectual property was in disarray. There were various people using Jimi's images and recordings and even musical equipment without his permission. That in itself shows that Jimi wasn't focused or fixated on handling his affairs in any type of organized manner. So the notion that Jimi was on the verge of a massive change in the midst of dysfunction and disorganization really doesn't fit the situation. Listen, I know I've already responded to number 2, but I want to go a little bit deeper and mention a couple of other things. When Jimi passed away, his estate went to his father, Al. Well, his given name was actually James Allen Hendrix, but they called him Al. Jimi's dad wasn't active at keeping a rein on Jimi's intellectual property. There were still multiple people taking advantage of Jimi's images and recordings. Even so, I think his dad was doing the best that he could, though he had no experience in handling something like this. Fast forward a few years to when Jimi's dad was having health problems and he was bedridden and in his final days. Jimi's biological mother had passed on early in Jimi's life, so Jimi's father had remarried. Al's new wife had a daughter named Janie, so Al adopted her, and she became Jimi's stepsister. When Al was bedridden and in his final hours of life, Janie came to visit him, and she had a couple of guests with her. Janie and her guests closed the door of that room, and when it finally opened, Al was dead. Janie and her 2 guests then stood there with legal paperwork where Al had just signed over Jimi's estate to Janie. That situation caused a big ruckus in the Hendrix family, especially amongst Jimi's siblings. Jimi's brother didn't take it very well at all, and he and the family thought that there was some foul play that happened in that room. The family thought it was suspicious that Al died while in the room with Janie and her 2 friends, while Janie emerges with freshly signed legal paperwork. To top it off, Janie was not a blood relative, nor had she ever met Jimi in her entire life. As it happened, Janie took over Jimi's estate, then set out on a diligent task of reining in Jimi's assets and his intellectual property. She's vigilant and protective of Jimi's image, name, recordings, and property. Janie has consolidated all of Jimi's holdings under the umbrella of Experience Hendrix LLC, where she is the CEO.